You are standing at 29,000 feet, that the altitude climbers call the 8,000 meter mark, higher than most airliners fly, and your body has already started shutting down. You just don't know it yet. Right now, every breath delivers about 1/3 of the oxygen your lungs pulled in at the beach where you spent last summer. Every breath you pull feels like sucking a thick milkshake through a coffee stir. Your legs have decided that lifting a single boot is a negotiation, and somewhere behind your forehead, the most sophisticated organ in the known universe, the 3 pounds of tissue that hold every memory you've ever made, is beginning to swell, misfire, and quietly betray you. You are in what mountaineers call the death zone, and the reason they call it that is refreshingly literal. Above this line, your body cannot live. It can only slowly stop. Here's the part that should scare you more than any avalanche. You feel almost fine. That is the trap. There's a way to walk back down from here alive. One specific decision that separates the survivors from the permanent landmarks, and we'll get to it. Hollywood taught you Everest is about willpower. The 2015 film Everest, the countless documentaries, the poster shot of a lone figure planting a boot on the summit against a screaming orange sky. They all sell you the same lie, that the mountain is a wall and grit is the ladder, that if you just want it badly enough, you push through. The truth is almost the exact opposite. Up here, the harder you push, the faster you die. The mountain doesn't test your courage. It quietly dismantles the machinery that produces courage in the first place. And the people who understand that, they're the ones still breathing. Let's go back to what's actually happening inside you, second by second. The core problem has a name, hypoxia. That simply means your tissues are not getting enough oxygen. And here's the thing. Most people misunderstand about altitude. There is exactly the same percentage of oxygen in the air up here as there is at sea level. 21%, same as always. What changes is the pressure. Down at the beach, the entire weight of the atmosphere is pressing that air into your lungs, packing the oxygen molecules in tight. Up here, with most of the atmosphere below you, that pressure drops to about 1/3. Same air, but so thin that each breath delivers only a fraction of the actual oxygen. You're breathing normally and starving anyway. That's the cruel trick of the mountain. It doesn't take the oxygen away, it just makes it impossible to grab. And below a certain line, your body can fight this. Give it a few weeks, and it adapts. It manufactures more red blood cells, the tiny couriers that carry oxygen. So each breath does more with less. That's why climbers spend over a month on Everest before the summit push, going up and down, letting the body adjust in stages. But there is a ceiling to that magic. Above roughly 26,000 feet, no amount of time helps. Your body cannot adapt, cannot acclimatize, cannot get used to it. It can only burn through its reserves and decline. Let's put a number on it. At sea level, the oxygen saturation in your blood, the percentage of your red blood cells actually carrying their cargo, sits comfortably between 95 and 100%. That's the number the little clip on your finger reads at the doctor's office. Up here in the death zone, that same number crashes to somewhere between 50 and 60%. And to put that in perspective, if you walked into any emergency room on Earth with a reading like that, you would be surrounded by a crash team within seconds. Up here, that reading is just Tuesday. It's the baseline you're trying to function on while also climbing. Your body is not stupid, though. It notices the shortage immediately, and it panics in the most reasonable way it knows how. Your breathing rate, normally around 12 to 16 breaths a minute at rest, accelerates to 60, sometimes 80. That's 4 times normal, and you're doing it while standing still. Your heart, that fist-sized pump in your chest, spikes toward 140 beats per minute, the rate of a hard sprint, except you're not sprinting, you're just existing. And here's the cruel arithmetic. All that frantic breathing and pumping burns enormous energy, which demands more oxygen, which you do not have. Your body is a company bleeding cash by working overtime to cover its own losses. Then the swelling begins, and this is where it turns genuinely sinister. Your brain, starved of oxygen, responds by widening its blood vessels to force more blood, and therefore more oxygen, into the tissue. Sensible move at sea level, catastrophe at altitude, because your skull is a sealed bone box with a fixed amount of space, and there's a delicate barrier around your brain's blood vessels called the blood-brain barrier. Think of it as a security fence that normally keeps fluid where it belongs, inside the vessels. Under this hypoxic stress, that fence starts leaking. Fluid seeps out of the vessels and into the brain tissue itself. Your brain begins to swell inside a container that cannot expand. This condition is called high-altitude cerebral edema, HACE, and the word edema just means swelling from trapped fluid. You will not experience this as my brain is swelling. You will experience it as the world gently going wrong. First comes a headache that no painkiller touches, because the problem is mechanical pressure, not chemistry. Then your coordination dissolves. Doctors call it ataxia, the inability to walk a straight line, to make your hands do what your brain orders. Climbers describe fumbling with a carabiner clip for 20 minutes, staring at their own gloved fingers like they belong to a stranger. Your judgment, the very tool you need to save yourself, is the first thing to erode. People up here have removed their gloves in 40 below cold because their swelling brain decided, with total confidence, that they were warm. They have sat down in the snow for a short rest that lasted forever. The organ responsible for keeping you alive is the organ being attacked, and it doesn't send a warning, it just gets things quietly, fatally wrong. Meanwhile, your lungs are running a parallel catastrophe. The same low oxygen causes the blood vessels in your lungs to constrict, trying to redirect blood toward the parts of the lung working best. But that raises the pressure inside those vessels until they, too, begin to leak fluid, this time into the tiny air sacs where oxygen is supposed to cross into your blood. This is high-altitude pulmonary edema, HAPE, and it means you're slowly drowning in fluid your own body is producing, standing upright, on dry land, in the coldest place you've ever been. You develop a wet, rattling cough. Every breath now has to fight through liquid. The one system trying to grab oxygen is filling with water, which starves the brain further, which worsens everything at once. It is a spiral, and every loop tightens. And this is all before we discuss the cold, because the death zone routinely sits at 40 degrees below zero, a temperature where Fahrenheit and Celsius agree just to make the point. Your body, already drowning and swelling, now has to defend its core temperature. So it makes a triage decision. It constricts the blood vessels in your fingers, toes, nose, and ears, pulling that warm blood inward to protect the vital organs. Your extremities are, in effect, voted off the island. Deprived of warm blood, the water inside those tissue cells begins to freeze. Ice crystals form, first in the fluid around the cells, then inside the cells themselves, where they expand and rupture the delicate structures that keep the cell alive. This is frostbite at the cellular level, not a Hollywood blackening, but a silent crystalline shutdown, cell by cell. The tissue goes numb, then waxy, then hard. You feel less and less, which your failing brain interprets as good news. It is not good news. Numbness is simply the nerves going silent as the tissue freezes, the body's last mercy before the damage becomes permanent. Your body, meanwhile, has been burning through 6,000 to 10,000 calories a day just trying to stay warm and breathing, far more than you can possibly eat, because your gut has also shut down digestion to conserve oxygen, so it starts consuming itself. Literally breaking down your own muscle for fuel. You're getting weaker by the hour, in the exact place that punishes weakness with death. There's a final betrayal hidden inside all of this, and it comes from your body's own attempt to survive. Remember how it makes extra red blood cells to carry more oxygen? At this extreme, it overdoes it. Your blood fills with so many of these cells that it physically thickens. Imagine your circulation turning from water into something closer to syrup. A thicker fluid is harder to push, so your already straining heart has to work even harder to move it, and sluggish, syrupy blood clots more easily. Tiny clots begin forming in the smallest vessels, the ones feeding your brain and your fingers and your heart. This is why climbers in the death zone don't just suffer altitude sickness. They have strokes and heart attacks at an age when they'd never expect one. Their own life-saving adaptation quietly plugging the pipes it was meant to supply. As the oxygen debt deepens and the swelling in your brain reaches a critical threshold, the panic fades. Not because things improve, because the part of your brain that generates fear is going offline with everything else. A dreamy warmth spreads through you. Some survivors describe a sense of peace, even euphoria, the conviction that they'll just close their eyes for a moment. Your breathing slows, not by your choice, but because the brainstem, the ancient control center that runs your automatic functions, is no longer getting clean enough signals to keep the rhythm. The breaths grow shallow, then far apart. Your heart's electrical timing scatters into an irregular, failing rhythm. And more than 5 miles above the sea, in a sealed white world with a view most humans will never earn, the machinery simply winds down. First, the memory, then the reasoning, last of all, the breath. And then it stops. That is death in the death zone. Not a dramatic fall, but a slow, warm, peaceful surrender to a mountain that never even noticed you were there. Now, May 10th, 1996, the deadliest day in Everest's history to that point. A Dallas pathologist named Beck Weathers is stranded high on the mountain, part of the disaster later immortalized in Jon Krakauer's book Into Thin Air. Weathers had gone nearly blind. A previous eye surgery reacted badly to the altitude, and as the blizzard swallowed the mountain, he collapsed into a hypothermic coma. His fellow climbers found him. They checked him. And twice, by 2 separate assessments, he was declared dead, beyond saving. His face was a sheet of ice, his body a block of cold. Someone radioed down to camp. Someone called his wife in Texas and told her Beck was gone. And here's the part that sounds like a mistake, but wasn't. Those climbers weren't careless. Deep hypothermia does something that fools even trained rescuers. As the body's core cools, the heart slows to a crawl and the breathing becomes so shallow and infrequent that, without a stethoscope pressed to the chest in dead silence, there is simply nothing to detect. No visible breath. No pulse a frozen, exhausted hand can find. The body isn't dead. It has dropped into a kind of deep freeze standby, metabolism nearly stopped, using so little oxygen that it can outlast what should have killed it. That's the cruel twist that makes hypothermia both a killer and occasionally a savior. And then roughly 15 hours later, Beck Weathers opened his eyes. He would later say he saw the faces of his wife and children so vividly that it wasn't quite a hallucination. It was an order. Get up, or never see them again. So this frostbitten, half-blind, oxygen-starved man that 2 experienced people had pronounced dead stood up in the snow and walked. He found the camp. He survived the night again when they still didn't expect him to. And he came home. The mountain kept a heavy price. The frostbite cost him his nose and much of both hands, but it did not take his life. He is, to this day, one of the most famous men to ever return from where the human body is not designed to return from. So how do you not become the other statistic? First, the single most important decision is your turnaround time, and you make it before you're even sick. You pick a clock time, say 11 a.m., and you swear that if you have not reached the summit by then, you turn around, no matter how close you are. Because the version of you at altitude, the one with the swelling brain, cannot be trusted to make that call in the moment. Second, supplemental oxygen is not cheating, it's medicine. It can lift that catastrophic 50% saturation into survivable range and buy your brain the time it needs. Third, if you or anyone in your group starts stumbling like they're drunk, slurring, or fumbling simple tasks, that's HACE, and there's exactly one treatment that works reliably. Go down. Every 100 feet of descent is a dose of the only real cure, which is thicker air. Fourth, keep eating and drinking even when your shut-down gut wants nothing, because a dehydrated, starving climber freezes faster and thinks slower. And fifth, protect the extremities obsessively, because the frostbite that costs you a hand starts as a numbness your compromised brain will happily ignore. Subscribe.